So each cell over here is 1 byte and there are 16 bytes in one row. So right now it is having 96, more than 100 bytes just for storing this. In reality, if you use Google protocol buffers to store this, you only need 32 bytes or 33 bytes. This video is being sponsored by Educative.io, which has a collection of well-written crafted courses for software developers, from Python to front-end to system design to scalability to Docker and whatnot. Learning at Educative is really powerful because they have all coding workspaces in the browser itself, and also they offer Educative Unlimited, in which you pay only once for all the courses. They have annual and monthly plans, and my audience gets a 10% additional discount on the 40% campaign they have for India. So you get a 46% discount on using the coupon Rachit, and you can have the link in the description below. So today I want to talk about JSON versus binary encodings. And this is a very important topic, and I want you as a software developer to think about this once. So when you're communicating with a server, this is a client, it uses web to communicate with the server. It sends a request and response is received. But a lot of things happen behind the scenes. Even when you are talking about sets, arrays, maps, classes, objects, these are in memory. But when you want to store them inside a disk, how are they stored, right? For Python, you have something known as Pickle. It kind of does those binary encodings for you, and then it also supports the decoding. Similarly, Java has its own serializable library. It is not very good. It is well known or notorious for its less efficiency, okay, poor performance. There are also very third-party libraries which do these encodings and decodings for us. So we'll discuss all these things in a video today, okay? And I hope you learn something out of it, okay? Now in web, JSON is very dominant, right? When you're sending a request, you create the JSON, you send it across the wire, the server receives it, creates the response and sends you back. However, JSON, how is it sent on wire? It basically is done, there is some encoding involved in that, okay? So there is some encoding which is done, so request becomes like this, it's encoded. Then it traverses through the web, it's received at the server which does the decoding for that, and then it basically understands what is the request. Then it generates the response, it first converts or encodes that. So this is the encoded response, it goes from the web to the final client where it is again decoded and then processed. Okay, so this is the cycle, how it looks like of encoding and decoding, and they should basically, how you encode here, it should be able to decode it here, okay? So that's why if you just rely on your programming languages serialization or encoding stuff, you want that encoding should be done in a fashion that even if it is decoded on another machine with some other architecture, other configurations, it should work, right? We want that robustness, otherwise how will web work, right? There are so many apps, we use them without even thinking about all these things. So let's try to understand how this works. Now you can say that JSON is something which is very easy to use, it's human readable, it's the best thing that has ever happened. So let's only rely on JSON, let's always store the data also in JSON, right? Because sets, arrays, maps, everything can be converted to JSON, you can serialize it as a string and then store it in the disk. But why is it not done that way? Agreed, JSON is something which will stay in the web architecture because JavaScript literally supports JSON flawlessly, so it's very good. But when you're talking about millions of data entries, right? When you're talking about terabytes of data, at that point of time, it really becomes important how you are storing that. What is the encoding that you are using? Okay, so that's why binary encodings come into play. These are better than JSON in the things of better compression, faster processing. That's why when you are storing data within the organization, okay, or you are, let's say, storing something to the disk. Now, once you have a database, the client does not care about how you store data in the disk, right? You can use whatever encodings you want. We really care about, as a user, we care about better compression and faster processing. Faster response times make us happy. So that's why these encodings become important when there is transfer of data involved. It can happen in network calls, it can happen when you are storing something to disk, and these are few scenarios in which it really becomes important which kind of encoding you are using. Whatever encoding you are using, one thing to keep in mind is you take care of forward and backward compatibility. So when you are discussing about encoding architectures, you decide whether one architecture is better than the other or not based on whether it's having forward and backward compatibility as well. If one architecture is having really good compression and faster processing rates, but it's not having forward or backward compatibility, there is no use, because modern apps, they evolve very fast, they are very dynamic, right? You will obviously add a lot of columns. Once your feature sets grows, you will add more tables, right? So all these new data sets should be handled by the old code, right? That is forward compatibility. And backward compatibility is that the new code that you are writing, it should still continue to work with old data. Like, let's say you have only first name so far, and now you also start storing last name. So in your database, at certain point, you will have both old entries as well as new entries. Also, in your clients, you will have some users who are using your old app, some users are using your new app. So if your old app is able to work with the new data, which means it should be able to ignore the last name and it should be able to use the first name. Okay. So that is forward compatibility. What is backward compatibility? The new app, it should still work with the old data set. So even if last name is missing, you should be able to set it to null and your app should work freely. It should not crash, right? So backward compatibility, since you are writing the new code, you know what is the new data. It's easy to achieve. Old code still able to serve the new data. This might be a bit tricky, because let's say you have added a new column last name, and your old code reads a new data set and then does some modification to the first name, and now it wants to store it. So at this point, the last name would be null in the old code base, right? Because it is not able to parse the last name. So when you're writing the new record with the updated first name, you should not remove or make the last name as null. You should keep that in mind. So that's why forward compatibility is a bit tricky to achieve. And now, obviously, I have told that JSON, it's widely used due to the simplicity and JavaScript compatibility. In the REST world, HTTP calls, it's also human readable, so development is also easier with JSON. But once you talk about microservice talking to another microservice, at that point of time, binary encodings or using Google's protocol buffers or Facebook's thrift, these encodings become really good. And the benefit of this is, these companies, when they are using these encodings, they also provide you out of the box support by their libraries in each language. In each major programming language, they have their own library implementations of doing these encoding and decodings. So that's why this kind of, like, you do the encoding with Pickle, then how would a Java code understand that? How would Java code decode something which was encoded in Pickle, which is a Python library? So to solve all these things, Facebook, Thrift, Google Protocol Buffers, these are the third party libraries, and they have their own implementation versions in each language, so that even if something is encoded in Python using Google's Protocol Buffers, you can still decode them in Java, because Java is also having the Google Protocol library version which knows how to decode that binary data. All right. So why are these important? Let me just give you an overview. Let's go to Visual Studio, and let's say you have some JSON, right? Now you will say, it's easy, human readable, let's store this in the disk itself. Well, you can do that, but let's see the hex dump of this. So the hex dump is basically literally showing us the bytes. So each cell over here is 1 byte, and there are 16 bytes in one row. So right now it is having 96, more than 100 bytes just for storing this. In reality, if you use Google Protocol Buffers to store this, you only need 32 bytes or 33 bytes. Even if you use Facebook's thrift compact model, it stores it in 33 bytes only. So that's why JSON is good for eyes, but when you're storing data, it's not so good. Even if I remove all the white spaces, for example, let's remove that. And let's actually remove the new line characters as well, okay? So let's remove the new line characters. So even if I remove the white spaces, you can see that we are still using close to 81 or 82 bytes, right? So you can see that it's not very suitable. And if you talk about few comparisons, I have few blog posts which I went through, and I think they will give you a better sense of how to compare these things. So let's look at this better programming blog post, in which this JSON, as you can see, it takes 82 bytes, 81 bytes. However, when you're doing binary encodings in Thrift or Protocol Buffers or Avro, so Avro was something related to Hadoop. When they were not satisfied with other binary encodings, they came up with this one. And you can see that when you're using these, the bottom line is basically 82 bytes with JSON encoding took 33 bytes using Thrift and Protocol Buffers, and only 32 bytes using Avro encoding. right? That's why the power of binary formats is something. It basically, the disadvantage is you are losing the human readability, and the benefit is like the compression rates and the processing time. I also went through another blog post at odd0.com, which was about beating JSON performance with Google Protobufs. In this, what they did is they generated a lot of like 50,000 entries. They did GET requests and all those kind of things. And they used different kind of backends. Sometimes they were using Java, sometimes JavaScript. And then they saw the performance of JSON and protocol buffers. Okay. So I will go through the graphs because that's more important. So you will see that for Node.js backend, the JSON and protobuf, even in Chrome, Firefox, Safari, it was kind of similar. However, protobuffs were a little bit faster, despite the fact that JSON is something which is very well compatible and comes out of the box with JavaScript. But even then, protocol was having a better response time. However, when you deal with non-compressed messages, you can see that the result changes quite a lot. Okay, so right now, like the JSON, all white space, everything removed, right? So at that point of time, the response was not that much different. But when you're dealing with non-compressed messages, you can see that protocol buffers straight away were a straight win. They were much better. Okay, if you talk about post request, there was not much difference, and the reason is in post request, well, you're not sending a lot of payload, right? A lot of payload comes when you're reading 50,000 rows, 100 million rows, right? 50,000 rows, million rows. When you're doing get operations, the data is really huge, and that point of time, the serialization has its own benefits, like which format you're using. So that's why in post request they were not able to see much difference. Even then, like except for Firefox and Chrome and Safari, protocol buffers were having a better response time. However, things magnificently changed when it was Java to Java communication. You can clearly see that protocol buffers in both compressed and non-compressed messages were the clear winner, right? The JSON was taking a lot of time in encoding and decoding. So that's why when you are talking about microservices, two microservices talking to one another, right? So that's why it really becomes important that you make sure that you are picking the right file encoding. But how is it happening that Google Protobuf buffers are only using 33 bytes? Well, the reason is the protocol buffers, they have their own definition first of all. So when you are having this JSON, which was over here, so when you are storing them in Google Protocol buffers, you first declare a schema, and that's another benefit of using these encodings. Your code, which is doing the encoding and decoding, it can also have schema validations, which is not coming out of the box in JSON. You have JSON schema, but you have to tie those pieces together. But over here, the schema validations are already coming into picture. So when you're storing this JSON object inside a Google Protobuf, it first tells that exactly creates a structure known as message person, and it's saying that all these keys, they become tags, okay, and they are simply having integer numbers, natural numbers 0, 1, 2, okay. So when you are storing these things, it does not literally store username inside the disk, it only stores the tag, and that's why they are having little less space than the actual JSON response. So you'll notice that it is having username, favorite number, and interest, which is an array. So let's see how the schema validation and all those things and the tag numbers are coming into picture. So we'll go over here. The protocol buffers, they declare a message person and they say that the username, it's having a tag 1. Then they're saying favorite number is an integer 64 and it's 2. Okay. And then interest was an array, but right now it's saying it's a repeated string interest and it's 3. So basically what is happening is when you are storing this in on disk, the tag 3, it will appear multiple times and the data type for every entry will be string. Okay, so this is how it handles when it's doing the encoding. So let's see the encoded data for Google Protocol buffers. It looks like this. So you can see that field tag 1, it was the username, it was Martin, now it is stored like this. Now you can see that 1 byte is being used to know what is the field tag and what is its type. So 0A, it basically is telling field tag is 1. So the first 5 bits are used to understand what is the field tag and the last 3 bits to understand what is the type. So type 2 is basically string, so that's why this is 0A. And then the length of the string is coming in next byte, which is 6. And then Martin, the ASCII values 4D6172. I think when you are going to VS Code, you can literally see for Martin this 4D6172, same thing, right? So you're simply storing Martin. So the value is coming like this. The length is stored in 1 byte and the type and the tag is stored in another byte. Similarly for favorite number, the favorite number key was having the tag 2, so that's why the 5 bits are 00010. And then you have the next thing, which is the type, which is integer, so for that is type 0, so that's why it's 10. And then the first byte is telling the tag and type, and then the next is basically the value 1337, it's being stored here. Similarly, now we have repeated. So field tag 3, you can literally see when you're storing in disk in terms of bytes, the field tag 3 is literally repeating multiple times. So this way they handle the arrays. Field tag 3 is having two field tags 3 entries. The type is 2, string in both. Again, the length is 11 and the other is 7, and then the hacking and daydreaming, the bytes are stored like this. So in this fashion, it will count. This is literally 33 bytes, and this is how they are saving space. Alright, I hope you found this video informative, and if that's the case, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you don't miss further updates from my side. Thanks for watching, and as always, happy coding. Bye bye.